I appreciate the comments. We want to move on to our next presentation. I want to also just thank Mayor Fudge for being here. I appreciate someone with local knowledge and the leadership skills that you've clearly shown in Windsor. Have been a strong advocate for this, and hearing your perspective even briefly here is helpful. You and I have had a chance to talk before, and enjoy the rest of your stay here in Santa Cruz.
John, could we ask that the questions, since we'll have them on tape, could we have them answered possibly on our website so the people who asked those questions, I mean, there were a couple of very concrete and specific questions as opposed to comments.
We'll figure out at the end of the meeting how we're going to answer the questions.
Okay.
All right, if that works out. We do have a second presentation today, which is from the city manager of Kirkland, Washington, Kurt Triplett, Mr. Dondero.
Yes, I'll keep this very brief. Mr. Triplett's going to talk to you about the Cross Kirkland Corridor, or CKC, and has an interim trail, which is a 10-foot wide, 5.75 mile crushed gravel trail that runs from the South Kirkland Park and ride through the Totem Lake Business District. And I'm going to let Kurt do the rest. I know he's well prepared. We talked earlier this morning, so I'm not going to take up any more of his time. Thank you.
Good morning.
I need to press. So I have about a 25-minute presentation. I just want to make sure, does that still work for the for the commission? Wonderful opportunity to be here and watch. I just want to say I want to compliment everybody's passion, because it really comes from a commitment to making a better community. So whatever side of the issues you are on, everyone is really trying to make their community a better place. It's neat for me to come down and see all that. But I have about a 25-minute presentation here, and my goal is not necessarily to give you any advice, but to tell you some things that we experienced when we went through a similar process, and many of the issues I heard are similar, and maybe give you some food for thought as you look forward and try to grapple with what you might do. So starting off, this was actually a grand opening of the interim trail. It happened in January of 2015, and it was when the Seahawks were their third consecutive year after they'd been to 2 Super Bowls. And just after we opened it, they lost to Carolina Panthers. But it did create a lot of fun people in Seahawks uniforms when we cut the opening. What I want to do is give a very brief history of the Cross Kirkland Corridor. One issue I didn't see a lot as I had a chance to look at your website was the issue of economic development, which I know got raised. And so I want to talk about how that has played out in a way we had no idea would happen when we opened up our corridor. I want to talk about some of the connections we were able to create with our interim trail strategy. I want to talk about our tangle over transit. We had a huge fight that didn't go well for our community on transit. And then I want to share with you some things I think might help as you seek ways to really create community and not conflict as you look to the future of your corridor. I also had a handout that I just gave everybody. There's some there as well that has a lot more information. In the transparency issue, this was actually a handout we made in 2015. And I kept it here because you can see it has a light rail train featured front and center. And our story has evolved considerably, but I want to show we started off with this idea that we wanted rail on our corridor. And I think like the armadillo's dead in the middle of the road, I'm sort of halfway between everything here. There's probably a lot in this presentation that everyone will be unhappy with. So,
welcome to our world.
Yes. So our corridor is somewhat unique. It's also a rail corridor. It's actually a rail banked corridor. It's actually owned by quite a few different entities, and you can actually see the breakout up here. It's about 41 miles. The top northern 12 miles are actually active freight operation. The rest of it is now being converted in various ways to different trails. You can see the Kirkland piece is that light green piece, 5.75 miles, sort of in the center of what we call the main line. This was actually purchased in 2009 from Burlington Northern by a coalition of governments. And you can actually see me when I had hair in that photo. At that time, I was actually the interim county executive, and I was part of the group that actually bought this corridor. The original partners, you can see there, that purchased the corridor Right after we bought the corridor, the Port of Seattle purchased the corridor from Burlington Northern, and the goal was they bought it for $82 million. Everyone else was supposed to pay them back. And not really cause and effect, but shortly after was no longer the interim executive, which was a choice I made. I didn't want to continue to be the executive. When the new executive was elected, they took the $26 million that the county had set aside and he used it to buy a gravel pit. So after that, the Cascade Water Alliance also pulled out. So the port found itself in this very interesting spot of about $40 million of the promised money from several of the jurisdictions was no longer there. So they went to everyone and said, who wants to buy a piece of the corridor? So I had fortunately moved from the county at that time to become Kirkland City Manager, and I went to my council and said, we have to buy this corridor. And one of the things I want to compliment this body on is the fact that you got it. I spent a lot of time telling groups, if you have a chance to buy a rail corridor, buy it. Even if you don't know what you want to do with it, you got to buy it. So just tremendous compliments to you that you have it, you're planning for it, you're already way ahead of the game. But as you can see, for Kirkland, this goes north-south through our entire city. It was an old abandoned railroad track, and it's next to just about everything. Schools, businesses, the community, access to the waterfront. And the track at the time really cut the city in half. It was really a canyon. It was wonderful to follow SMART because SMART was actually our inspiration when we started. Hey, people are thinking about transit and trails. And we used this visual multiple times. And this is actually from one of my 2012 presentations. So I wanted to sort of be fair that this was what we started showing people when we first started talking about trail and transit. But the two things I really want to emphasize were the vision statements we came up with Kirkland, which was, the first was that planning or implementing one mode, whether it be trail or transit, should not foreclose future use by another mode. And that was really critical to our decision to do an interim trail. So when we took out the tracks, we knew that if something like SMART had to be built, those tracks were no good anyway. They would have had to have been replaced, which is what you saw in the presentation he had. But we also had a lot of people who said, pave it right now. And we said, once you do that, it's really hard to bring something else back on. So we chose not to pave it, but we did choose to take out the tracks. And what you can also see, though, is one of the key things was this was going to be one of the ways we connected our community to the region, both in transit and bike peds. So this is just a very brief history, and the two key ones are we bought the corridor in 2011 for $5.2 million. That was our section. And we opened it in January of 2015. And you can just see sort of the evolution as we took out the tracks and put in the interim trail. So what happened next is a really wonderful story because it has really truly transformed our community and brought economic development on a scale that we never imagined when we first bought the corridor. This is the one slide I'm going to spend a little bit of time on, and the rest go fairly quickly. But when I was hired as a city manager, as well, those of you who have city managers know, you go to your bosses and you say, what do you want me to do? And they said, we have this old dilapidated mall up in the north. You have to revitalize it. And we have this little company called Google that's just getting started, and they have a headquarters here, about 1,000 people. You got to keep them here, and if you can figure out how to get them to expand, you should do that too. So those are my two tasks. It had nothing to do with the corridor. We brought in the Urban Land Institute, which some of you may be familiar with, a nationally organized group, and we said, give us insights. How is our zoning? How is our land use? What can we do? And they went and they toured the mall, and you can see on the top there we have a lake, and we had where the corridor was. And they said, wow, what you really need to do is you really need to turn that lake into a park, and you need to buy this corridor thing, and you need to open it up as a trail. And if you do that, you're going to catalyze economic growth and housing and walkability. When I met with the Google executives and said, what do you need to stay here? What was fascinating is they said, we want to park on the other side of that railroad track. That's all we want. We don't have enough parking for our place. And there was a big giant open space over there. And they said, and Burlington Northern won't let us drive across it. So we'd like you to buy that corridor so we could drive, our employees could drive and park over on the other side of it. I was like, that's it? That's all you want? Yeah, that's all we want. So I had the Urban Land Institute and I had Google saying, hey, you should really think about this differently. You should think about this as an economic development tool, not just as a trail and transportation tool. And so when we did our master plan, we began to really incorporate that thinking. And one of our commissioners said, this corridor needs to be a place to go to, not just a place to go through. And I think that might be something you want to ponder as you get to your next steps. Like, how can you use this to actually create community and not just create transportation? We had 4 major goals: connect Kirkland, which is, of course, the transportation piece. And again, you can see light rail. It was in the very first master plan we had. But then we started talking about things like a greener Kirkland and greenhouse gas emissions and ways to make it the greenest corridor in America is what we decided we wanted to try for. And how do we activate it and evolve over time? How do we turn it into an economic development tool? And it worked. So this is actually Google Phase 2, the building you see on the lower left. We let them drive over and park, and they said, we like this space so much, we want to build a LEED platinum building for another 1,200 employees. Can we do that? Yeah, okay, we can let you do that. So not only did they do that, but what they actually said is, now this big space that we have between where those tracks used to be, could we just turn that into a park for you? Because our employees really want to get out on this thing. And so what we said is, well, we have this master plan. If you're actually willing to implement the version of the master plan between the 2 buildings, we'll let you do that. So this aerial is taken from a drone. You can actually see where, I don't know if this has a pointer, where you see that paved concrete is actually where the old railroad tracks used to be. So Google, on their own, came to us and invested $3 million to build basically a linear park, and then they gave it to us. Because it was public land, so I wouldn't let them have the land. And then they built a bridge across it that connects the 2 buildings. At the same time, what we did is we said, can we think differently about our land use planning around the corridor? And we came up with what we called trail-oriented development. And so we actually revamped all of our development regulations and said we need to encourage things like wineries and breweries and coffee roasteries, or places where people can make things and then sell them, so like glass blowing and those kinds of things. So how do you help an industrial area convert from being a warehouse district to being something that's much more active? And we actually now have 3 breweries that have developed along the corridor, and people bike to them, spend a while, and then hopefully they get a different way home. But so far we have had no incidents with the people biking to the breweries. And this is that mall. This is the former mall. So after we actually developed a master plan for the park, I'm going to go back to that slide in a second. What we did is we actually took that old park with the corridor, and we did a master plan, and we've invested about $9 million in developing this park. It's not finished yet, but it has a bridge that goes over the roads and links to the corridor. When we bought the corridor and we designed the park, we took that to the mall owners, and we said, this is the public investment we're making. Will you guys match this? And they turned around and they actually sold this to a new developer, CenterCal. CenterCal came in with a complete re-envisioning of the whole community, and they've actually built that whole first building you see on the lower half, and they're almost finished with the second half. But there's going to be almost 1,000 units. There's almost 100,000 square feet of retail. There's about another 200,000 square feet of office. There's a cinema, all sorts of things going on there, and it's had all sorts of things now happening around it. We have almost 4,000 units developing around the mall because this is happening. And one of the key reasons it happened was because we bought the corridor and because we designed the park and showed them how they all worked together.
When you say units, you mean housing units you're talking about?
I'm sorry?
These are housing units you're talking about?
Yeah, when they're done, there'll be 850 housing units here. The surrounding neighborhood's going to have about 4,000 when they're finished. And then our master plan tries to take this whole idea of transforming the community much further. So we built into these, we haven't had a chance to actualize any of these yet, but in the final plan, like you saw in the Google segment, we're going to have eddies where people can stop and rest and work on laptops. We've already begun to use this for festivals. It's like a linear festival street. We have a group that does a Crossing Kirkland event every year where we have food trucks and stations and things, and so we're already getting people using it in a totally different way than just biking and walking. We have a vision of art. We've already had several wonderful murals that have been painted along the corridor, and we have people who want to bring in ephemeral art, and we also have folks who want to bring in statues and things, so we're going to have a huge art component to this. We want to fill it with light, so that it's interesting both in the daytime and the nighttime, and we've put this already in a couple of our locations. And then when that whole greener corridor in America thing, we also want to use this to create urban water system management, so stormwater management, and also give people a way to interact with and touch the environment. So all of those things are things we're trying to build in that sort of help create that transformation, not just this idea that a corridor like this can only be a trail or a transit corridor. And so how has the interim strategy worked? It's worked actually far beyond anything that we actually imagined. More people use this thing the second you take the tracks out than you can possibly imagine. So just a couple quick slides here that show the before and after what we had when it was first tracks in 2012. Looks very similar to some of the things I saw in Santa Cruz. I had a chance to tour some of this last night. You can see we turned really dangerous intersections to much more safer pedestrian and bike crossings. Part of our environmental commitment is all these are solar-powered flashing beacons, and all the pavement is pervious pavement. We had a whole host of logs and planks and things going across drainage ditches to get to the railroad tracks. We replaced those with true paths and little bridges. We had all kinds of communities coming to us saying, how can we connect to this thing? Because it used to be, it's either a big berm on the top or it's a big ditch down below. And so we created all kinds of little neighborhood grant programs. And we got work parties out, and people built these things like these stairways with ability to roll your bike up there. And so it's created an opportunity to access this spine through the corridor, through the city of Kirkland, that we didn't ever have before. And we have thousands of people using it now. There's also amazing views on this corridor. Kirkland kind of slopes down to the water, and because train tracks have to be flat, there's a flat corridor all the way through, and so you have these great views over the tops of houses. And before, when it was just a track, no one really got to use that. The only people who really got it were the houses above it. Now we have thousands of people who get that view as they go by it every day. And then a safety issue. We had lots of places that when it was track felt very unsafe. We had issues of homelessness and other challenges. This is a place we call the Highlands Pass. When we put in the interim trail and activated it, this actually became people's refuge. More and more people want to go to this section because it's just so pretty. And it's something that you don't really find in an urban area. It's like you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. And people walk their bikes, they walk dogs. We have all sorts of multi-generational use, kids, grandparents. It's been pretty extraordinary. So far, nothing but everybody knew that transit was coming. So what happened? Everything went to heck. It went to heck faster than you could possibly imagine. So we opened the corridor in January of 2015. This conversation started in January of 2016, a year later. You would have thought we had an interim trail for the last 20 decades. People were like, we cannot give up this corridor that we've had for so many years. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? I was at a meeting where we had it in our community center. I had 400 people turn out to tell us that transit on the corridor was the exact wrong thing for the city to do. But we worked through that. We had a lot of conversations about that. That was one of my less exciting times of being a city manager. Our council, though, really stepped up and really stayed committed to the vision of transit on the corridor. And what happened was we got this really interesting rock and a hard place thing where our council was firmly committed to the vision of trail and transit. Our community was saying, don't put buses on the corridor, don't put trains on the corridor, you can't possibly do this. And the SaveOurTrail.org was a group that formed immediately. They turned out by the hundreds at that meeting. Probably 70 to 100 of them showed up at every city council meeting for 6 months wearing green shirts. Lots of lively testimony. It was a good old time. We then came up with this idea of buses on the corridor. And we thought it would be a cheaper, more effective way to provide service, and that our corridor wasn't really right for light rail. And we tried to talk to our transit agency about that. We said, hey, have we got a great idea for you? You guys want to put a $1.5 billion light rail line down this corridor. We have a $500 million bus vision that's actually as effective and a whole lot cheaper. Why don't we do that? Meanwhile, all the people in the back were saying, no buses, no buses, no buses. Our regional entity said, we don't do buses. We do light rail. We literally had a conversation where they said, it's light rail or nothing. So we are caught right in the middle of this. Is it a train? Is it transit? Is it nothing? Our council actually said, then right now, it's nothing. Right? So very, very brave stance for them to take. And what actually happened is that 2016 ballot measure did not include any investments of transit along the Cross Kirkland Corridor. And I'll talk a little bit more about that debate about why I still think that's better for our community. But this was because we were in a mode battle. It was either light rail or nothing. It was tracks or nothing. And that's, I think, something that we have an opportunity to maybe share some lessons learned with your community. So what would those be? What if I could go back and do it all over again? What would I have done? Well, we really spent a lot of time afterward talking to people about outcomes. And, the terms opponents, I heard a lot. People come up and believe me, I've been on the other side of this. People get visceral. They get personal. It's disappointing on all sides when people choose to go that way. And if people can just set the outrage aside and you can have facilitated discussions with people to talk about what outcomes are you trying to achieve? What are you afraid of? What do you want to see? And so we worked through all that. And when we actually could get people to sit down and say, what are you afraid of about a train, right? So Sound Transit, being very transparent, they have had accidents. And so people are saying the safety of having a light rail train coming through our suburban community is huge. You saw that beautiful view section that I showed you. People didn't want to see 30-foot high catenary lines going all the way down the corridor. Probably one of the biggest things, and it was referred to when you talk about creating the quiet zone, the investment you have to make to keep a quiet zone safe really does divide the community again. It's great for the trains, but it creates a huge infrastructure that sort of creates a barrier from people, in our opinion, going east-west. So this whole canyon effect, a reestablishing of a barrier down the community was something that people are really, really upset about. And when we talked to them about buses, all they could envision was, you want to bring these buses from Asia that are going to blow black smoke and be really expensive and stink, and how would you do that? Why would you destroy our community with these horrible diesel buses? We're like, wow, I haven't seen a diesel bus like that in 20 years in the Pacific Northwest. But that's what really, we kept saying, great, this is good. Tell us. What is it? When we said, what do you want? What is it that you would like to see? And transit kept coming back up. We want people to be able to commute on this corridor. Like, wow, that's not what you actually said 3 months ago. So transit started to reemerge, which was great when we had a chance to really talk with people. They wanted paved path, most importantly, and they wanted a shared path. They wanted, as they call them, the crazy bikers to have their own dedicated line over here, and they wanted the normal people to be able to be over here so that they could bike with their kids or walk their dogs. And they said, if you're going to have buses, they better not make any noise and they better not have any emissions. So the shared outcomes we were able to develop through all this were, okay, we need a paved trail. It's got to be on a more human scale. We need an electric fleet. We need to have no rail in our particular segment. This all happened after the fact, and I'm sad about that because we probably would have been more successful if we had thought this through and had more of those facilitate discussions ahead of time. But I think we actually now have a plan to be united if a Sound Transit 4 ever happens. And I've been tasked by my council to think of ways that we can implement some of these things on a much smaller scale locally. So, what would I do different? What are possible things for this community to think about? Constant communication. We didn't do enough of that. If I could have done this again, I would have had a billboard every 100 feet saying, transit is coming, transit is coming, transit is coming. When we opened the interim trail, we had an opportunity to do that and we didn't because we thought everybody knew. It was just understood. And even 2 years later, you have the turnover in their population or someone who never paid any attention who now sees this wonderful interim trail that they're on. They can't even imagine where someone came up with the idea of transit, right? So I think if you pick something, what you want to do is just make sure that's clearly communicated in a way that can't be avoided so that people can't come and say, I wasn't part of this, I didn't know. And if we had done that, I think that would have changed the conversation dramatically. You have an opportunity that we didn't have, which is disruptive technology is emerging all over the place right now. And some of it was referred to in our previous conversation. But this whole idea of ACEs, which you guys are probably very familiar with, but the automated, connected, electric, and shared economies, they're going gangbusters. And they're just waiting for a corridor to be the first corridor that this happens on. What you can see in the bottom, my left, is at Heathrow Airport. They already have these automated vehicles that drive people around. King County Metro, which provides our service, actually has Proterra electric buses. So they've got a fleet of about 20 of them right now. So no emissions, almost no sound. Google, which is in our headquarters, so I had to put the cute Google car in there, is obviously trying to make driverless cars everywhere, and almost every major auto company is right on the cusp of bringing automated vehicles. And there's lots of these little shuttle ideas out there that everyone's using, whether it's at a university or an institution. All this stuff is happening right now. It's real, it's live technology, it can be used today. And the next thing that didn't exist a year ago that we're now grappling with is this whole idea of this sort of ACES concept going down the next level to bikes. So electric bikes, electric scooters, both for the shared economy, so a tourist can use it, or a person who just wants a one-off trip that day. They want to take it to catch on the bus. So they want to buy a commuter bike. They don't want to have to figure out how to put on Lycra. They don't want to have to fix a flat tire. And the electric bikes themselves are now turning into true commuter vehicles. I mean, these things can now, some of them can go 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. Whether that's a good idea to have on your corridor, I don't know. But this didn't exist when we had our conversations in 2015 and 2016. And now it exists today and is getting more and more, and is creating more and more options. So this combination of the ACES on the vehicle side and the ACES on the bicycle side, I think gives your community, and I think all future communities, a way to think differently about how you might approach transit on a corridor. And then I'm known up in the Northwest as the gondola guy. So I always like to bring out one thing that's actually old school technology is aerial tramway systems. And particularly for places like you where you have estuaries and rivers to cross and valleys and things to go over, fixed guideway technology might be really intriguing for you to evaluate, particularly for first and last mile connections. And a lot of times when I talk about this, people go, are you crazy? Who would do that? Well, Roosevelt Island Tramway has been in operation for decades. The one on the top left is actually in downtown Portland. It goes from downtown Portland up to the Oregon State Health Sciences Building. The one with the yellow cars, this is actually becoming a huge transit technology in South America. And so this is actually a way that those residents of their city get from the lower part of the city to the upper part. And then this one on the far lower right was open in London shortly after the London Olympics. So they're also using this now as a transit system. And for those of you who don't think this can happen here, I just took this yesterday at the Center Boardwalk. I was like, hey, it's a gondola. So we sort of know and love these kind of technologies, but we don't yet think of them as a potential solution in our transportation world. And I think that's something the United States can do much better. So my last section as I go in is sort of the whole role of pilots. And I like to put up this slide that a few good pilots can change the world. And I think that's really true, especially in the public sector. We don't do enough of this. And I think corridors like this are exactly the place to try things. And so there is so much out there to try. I gave you a few things to top, but one of my favorites is the Chinese straddle bus, which is in the middle. And if you Google Chinese straddle bus, you'll actually see a really cool video of this. And basically what they were experimenting with is this idea of putting a bus over an entire lane of traffic. So it just sails over the traffic back and forth. Wow. They have not built it yet, but it's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool.
The one on the bottom is the Cambridge Expressway, and they had a different way. They basically decided not to just pave over everything. And so the buses actually run in these little runnels. But as I said, there's just a lot of stuff out there that's happening that if you took segments of your corridor, and I'm trying to do this in Kirkland as well, and said, could we experiment with a few of these things? So when we go back to using my own corridor as an example, when we go back to our shared outcomes, and I take the light rail off and I say, what could I do with this transit platform? Right? There's my human scale, there's my separated, this is the ultimate vision. But I could have a really great electric bus system. And I could put in an aerial tramway, which is actually what I'm trying to do. But so far, I have not been successful. This is my vision of how you could actually use a straddle bus and go straight down the center, and you could actually just ride over all of the bike users. Could we do this? I don't know, but it doesn't seem like it's spatially impossible to do, right? So just maybe trying to think differently. And then because I started with the Seahawk thing, I got to end with the Seahawk thing. So in 2013, when the Seahawks won the Super Bowl, our quarterback had started his group and said, why not us this year? And it became a mantra that maybe some of you heard about. But many of the members of the team credited Russell Wilson saying, why not us again and again and again throughout the year as the reason they won the Super Bowl in 2013. And one of the things I'd like to leave with you, and I apply this to my own staff all the time, is, why not you? Why not us to be the first place that you actually try transit in a different way? I absolutely believe you have to have transit on this corridor. There's no question about it. I think if it was just a trail, I don't think that would be sufficient. And I think that would be a waste of a precious corridor. But I think, given the way things are changing, you have a really interesting opportunity to experiment that not many people do. And what you get out of the experimentation option is, if you think about building rail in a different time scale, this is what we did. These current tracks have to come out in order to put something like SMART in. But when they have to go back in, it's totally up to you, right? So you might want to consider you take them out for a bit. You can have an interim trail that gets you immediate use, but you could run something on it. What is that thing? I don't know. That would be up to your community. And if that doesn't work, you can always put the tracks back. I know there's lots of discussions about could that really happen, but it really depends on the elected leadership at that time. So why not you? Why not us? That's what I'm trying for. And so that's just a sort of a recap of everything I talked about, and I'm very happy to answer questions and give you any thoughts from the Northwest. But thank you so much for the opportunity to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Triplett, and I appreciate the conciseness of the information, but you gave us a lot of good stuff to think about. Now I'll turn to my colleagues to see if they have questions. Mr. Rockin.
I was intrigued. Thank you for your presentation, really helpful in a lot of ways. I was intrigued by your idea that, maybe you should, because the reaction to now that we have our bicycle and pedestrian trail, we don't want it messed up with transit.
Yep.
And you said, maybe we should have put billboards every 100 feet or something. How about leaving a track that tells people really clearly that this is transit, even if you're not going to end up with train, even if eventually certainly you will have to tear the track out even if you want train, as was pointed out by SMART. But even if you're going to go to buses or to like little vehicles, personal rapid transit or other kinds of options, wouldn't it be smart, given what your experience has been, if you really want to have transit eventually, and to like head off you're messing up our wonderful pristine trail, just to leave the tracks in as a very clear billboard message. Instead of spending money on a bunch of billboards, just leave a rusting old track that's not going anywhere.
Well, wait. So I have a slip in here that talks about our cost-benefit analysis and what we spent on the interim trail. The reason we didn't choose to leave the tracks in, and we had that debate. In fact, we explored things like, could you lay a cover over the top of the tracks? I mean, we actually costed that out, and it was a lot of money, but we talked about putting a temporary cover over it and having that be the interim trail and just leaving the tracks in for that very purpose. You can't put the trail next to it very cheaply. The wonderful thing about the interim solution is it's cheap, it's cost-effective, and it's quick. We did it really fast. And in fact, on the salvage parts of the ties and the rail, you actually make some money on the thing, right? So you can make an interim trail investment very quickly, and you don't have a lot of environmental hurdles to go through because you're not widening its footprint, and you're not creating, well, at least up in Washington, I don't know, it could be different here in California, but so that idea of quick and cheap access to the corridor was really important, and we couldn't figure out a way to leave the tracks in and actually have a safe interim trail that wasn't extraordinarily costly. So if we could have actually built the full trail next to it first, we might have considered that. That was something we chose to do. As I said, because we didn't include any additional information with it, it was a mistake to just take out the tracks and put in the interim trail. I will leave you with a message of hope. At that meeting that had 400 people, probably about 100 of them wanted transit. And in our follow-up conversations after the Sound Transit 3 ballot measure, everybody, even people who use the corridor, said, now that we're thinking about it, this transit thing really does kind of make some idea. Can you think about ways to bring transit back? So if you can get out of mode and get off of whether it's a train transit, but just transit, I think you can have a lot of success. But we did look at that, and different parts of that corridor made different decisions. We were just our piece. King County left the tracks in for that very reason. So they're just taking them out now, 5 years later.
Of course, it would depend on which there's huge disagreement about. I'm not going to try and settle in this comment.
Right,
but,
right.
Whether you have adequate width to build the trail with all the tracks still there and so forth, which people disagree about within the county.
And it varies community to community, for sure.
Thanks for that response. It's helpful.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. So thanks for coming. To me, that was an excellent presentation just from the standpoint that it embraces the future, and it also deals with possibility thinking that doesn't exclude anybody. You're open to transit. Your people, your council, your community was that way. I believe Kirkland has about 90,000 people.
Right.
And it's next to Redmond and
Correct, right.
Part of the Seattle community, and you have a much bigger population base. But what's interesting to me is that you saw within the time frame of a year new things coming on the market, whether they were scooters, whether they were e-bikes and so forth, that took a quantum leap in terms of ridership, because now you can go 20 miles on a trail like this. My compliments, just from the standpoint of, and whether, I was a little skeptical of SMART, but the big thing for me is the cost involved. And the issue with the cost of a train system is that you keep adding on to it, and then it becomes too big to fail. And so regardless of what the outcomes are, you still have to pay money on and on and on, because you've just put in $500 million, and you're not going to say goodbye to something like this. But this could be $2, $3, $4, $5 million. And if a transit solution comes, you can wash your hands of that investment and say, listen, we're moving on to something better. And it doesn't exclude the possibilities of you having a transit solution later on. I thought it was a good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bertrand.
So it's like, how do you solve a problem? And so my background's engineering, the whole thing in the semiconductor field, and how do you solve a problem? It's understanding the different components. But when I was successful in understanding a problem and getting to a solution, it depended on how I parsed out that problem, how I understood what that problem was. Right. And it seems to me we're sort of caught in that here with a huge number of variables. That's our population and all the needs of the population. And the different people that have certain ideas that they feel will solve that problem. And that was spoken to earlier, individual from SMART. So my question is a little bit different here. I don't think we'll get to that answer, but it was pointed out that around 600,000 over the course of the time period that SMART was collecting these numbers were off the freeway, coming and going, okay. And you were talking about the trail and how it sort of got the community to support it. So what I'm trying to understand maybe, or you could give me some insight, maybe you haven't actually counted the numbers, but ever since I've been actively involved in political organizing, my concept was building community. Since my 20s, it was building community, and there's different ways to get to that. I worked in community food stores and community events. Okay, how many people do you feel are being impacted by a trail that's going through a community? You pointed out all these different projects, and we have some in Capitola. We built a stairway so we could get to a little trail, so, like 200 feet long, and people want to build a stairway, right? Amazing to me. So that's what I'm trying to get to. So building community, all the different things that came out, like the brew pubs that you talked about. So I'm wondering, can you give me an idea of the relative impact in terms of involving people in a regular community and what it meant to them?
So I would say there isn't a single part of the community that hasn't been positively impacted by the corridor. Now, I won't say that was true if we tried to put transit on it, but so I just want to say that was what was really surprising to all of us. Everybody uses it for all sorts of different things, whether it's people who are just want to walk for their little segment. My daughter's 13, she's in middle school, and she and her friends always meet on the Cross Kirkland Corridor, and then they go off to whatever they want to do, the mall or something else. I mean, that's become the meeting place for the kids who are like 15 and under. We have lots of runs on it already. Basically every foot race through Kirkland now has some segment of the corridor as part of the run, whether it's a half marathon or a 3K or a 5K. People just use it all different ways and all different kinds. We have it's really opened up east-west. I think that was the thing that we didn't really expect, was how little people passed this corridor when it was a track, because it was really a barrier. You could walk across it, and you could even walk along it. And there were some hardcore people who did, right? But as soon as it became something you could actually come like this, it just completely connected the city in ways that no one could imagine. And it was one of the reasons we were so surprised by how much they loved it immediately. But I would say, honestly, it's the one thing I get the most credit for as a city manager, and I didn't do it. I mean, I helped buy it, but people love it. I mean, it's just, and they talk about it all the time, and it's really become a centerpiece of the community, and we never really expected that. We actually kept thinking of it really more as a transit corridor, and it's really become a part of the fabric of the community.
One little follow-up. So in terms of the self-image of the community, has that sort of expanded its sense of self-image? It's sort of like another aspect of the community that, people say, I like to buy houses near a school. It's sort of a one.
The second this opened, every real estate sign or flyer said, X miles or X quarter miles or 2 blocks from the Cross Kirkland Corridor. It instantly became the thing that you wanted to be by.
Wow.
Google, part of the reason Google wanted to develop their section was all their employees kept saying, we want to run on this thing at lunch. So the 1,000 people were sitting right there. They wanted access to it immediately. It was just, the other biggest thing is actually school walk routes. This actually connects to 4 schools, and it actually takes them over individual streets, because we have a viaduct similar, 2 bridges that are similar to some of the things that you ran into, and it suddenly got the kids off the street. So it's become this huge school walk route. That is another thing that we didn't really expect. We talked about it a little bit, but it happened to be much more successful than we thought.
Thank you.
Mr. Botdorf.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was absolutely fabulous. I think both of the presentations today give us great dimension on choices. And what I take away from this is what you alluded to, is this whole world of what ifs, okay? Because that's where I find us right now. I'm thankful right now that we're doing a unified corridor study.
Absolutely. It's a great
I'm probably not so much thankful because we're only analyzing 5 scenarios, and based on what you said, we should be analyzing 500 scenarios because my fear, and I think the fear of everybody in this panel is here we are with this opportunity to move in a direction when we don't really know what that direction is. We know that we have this great commodity. By far, there's no doubt that the best thing we ever did was buy this corridor. And even if we had to pay it back or whatever it is, you just don't get the opportunity to own that. So whether it's transit, whether it's trail, all these things, you had a fortunate partner with Google that helped fund a lot of your things. There's no doubt that whatever we do along this corridor, just because it's a scenic corridor, it's going to be enhanced and it's going to be remarkable. And the challenge, I think, for everybody on this board, for this commission, for this county, and I got to take it to that level, is this county it's a wonderful piece of property and it's the right choice, and it's not black and white. It's totally gray, and it's some things may work, some things may work better, and I hope that somehow there's a compromise that comes with the people in this county so we can work together to do what's best and serves the county across the board. Thank you again, both of you, for your presentations.
Yes, thanks. Interesting presentation, and really expeditious in terms of how much information and detail you've provided us with. A couple questions that I do have to do with what was the impact before this was even being studied to be used? Did you have a serious problem like we have in this county in terms of Highway 1? Was there something identified already that said that we needed to work on this segment and doing?
Absolutely. The Seattle area is the 4th most congested in the country, so we're very similar to the area down here. And my very first slide, one of the reasons Sound Transit was one of the purchasers of the corridor. Sound Transit actually has a transit easement on the entire 42 miles. So their interest at that time and why they bought it was to actually have some sort of transit alternative along the corridor. So this parallels which is 405, which is very similar to your 101, which is one of the most congested in the state. And it goes all the way through the east side, through Bellevue and Redmond and Kirkland, and it's where our sort of tech community is. And we need options. And I think that's the one thing I really appreciated that was said earlier is whether the corridor, how it's used for transit, and it's not just us, it's that whole 42 miles, to create options is absolutely critical. And it's not a solution, but it's one of many. And I think that really struck me. And I think also what he said about if you're fighting, you get nothing is also very true. We were fighting up and below, and we got nothing, right? But what we did get, and I would offer, is we have still preserved all our options. right? So what we did to the corridor got the community to use it, got the community excited, and we could still put in a train, and we could still put in transit. So we have, by trying to say we're not going to do something that precludes something else, we've kept all our options open. But yes, it has been very much imagined as a transit corridor from its very inception, as well as a trail.
And do you have any other development with the highway that is with the impact that you've got up there? Because this seems like it's more of a community-based, and I don't know how much, what percentage of the community benefits from it when everybody's going down to that section instead of the community as a whole needing to get maybe out. I don't know if you're a point to commute to versus people leaving that area out. How does that? How would that differ, or how you've?
I don't know if you can scroll all the way back to the first map on the, or I guess I could, but I don't know if there's a simple way to do that. But so I think you maybe hit the 1 or something there. So I'll try to answer that with projections. So the Sound Transit projections for the ridership, if they put a light rail line from Bellevue, which is our major east side city, to Totem Lake, which is where the small is. So you can see where Sound Transit owns is in central Bellevue, and they have a light rail line they're building across into Seattle. That one right there, please. Thank you. So what they were going to do is build a light rail line through Kirkland up to our urban center, which was the mall. But their ridership projections for the $1.5 billion was 5,000 people a day. Okay. And that sort of sounds like a lot, maybe, but we actually have 2 buses that carry 8,000 people a day that are just our little sort of semi-regional buses. And so what we said, why we came up with the bus alternative, is we said, wow, that's a whole lot of money and a whole lot of impact on the community, and we can maybe actually exceed that ridership if we had this little bus fleet concept. And so we were trying to convince them of that. They are going to be putting light rail on segments of this corridor through Bellevue and on to Redmond. The rest of the corridor right now has no plans for transit on it. They basically just said, we're not going to talk about it for the short term. The total ridership on light rail helps, but it's not replacing lanes of traffic, so it's the same discussion. But they're looking at widening 405, they're looking at toll lanes. We already have some toll lanes, they're looking at more of those. So there's all sorts of other conversations going on about what needs to be done to do congestion. But if you could actually have transit on this corridor, you could get off the freeway, run parallel to it, and then get back on in Bellevue and go across to Seattle. So it would help a lot of people quickly.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to just thank both our presenters. It's been really great information. As someone that's worked for years on acquiring our corridor and advocating for it, it's taken me aback the divisiveness of both sides of this conversation. And what your presentations have highlighted for me is that we have a lot more in common, both of you, all of you in the audience, those who would want only a trail and those who want a rail and a trail. We have a lot more in common in terms of our goals. And that's what I would love for everyone to actually focus on as a community, so that we can come together as a community and come up with those really good options. And one of those goals is we need to preserve the option of transit along this corridor. It's absolutely bad public policy not to preserve that option. Exactly what that option is and how it rolls out, that's another question, and obviously that's the divisive question. But we need to keep that option open. It's just silly to do otherwise. But thank you again. It was great information. I love trains. Every time I travel, we always find my husband makes me ride a train of some kind, even if it's dilapidated, he doesn't care. So I've survived lots of bad trains and good trains, and I love the SMART train. It's a great train. And congratulations on what a wonderful thing you've done for your community. I mean, these walking trails, this one's unique. I haven't been on this one, but I've been on many other ones, and they're just wonderful. I mean, they're just used by everyone. And I can just imagine how it would explode our tourism industry and our economy here if we had such an amenity here. So thank you.
Mr. Caput. No question. Mr. Triplett, thank you very much for the presentation. I chuckled a little bit when you said that the Cross Kirkland Corridor, everybody talked about. That's just like our corridor, where everybody talks about it. We just don't talk about the same things.
Yes, exactly.
So true. But it is a big piece of conversation. Just to get clarity, the rail line that went through Kirkland was an unused. corridor. There wasn't any freight on it or anything like that.
Right, so the Burlington Northern had abandoned the line, and then we rail banked it. Okay. So the northern piece in Snohomish County does still have active freight, and actually that is also in public ownership, but it does have a freight line on that section, but the rest of it did not.
And in looking at the maps, it seems like the surrounding area is all urban. There's no ag.
There's no ag, right?
Yeah.
That's
So
correct.
there's slight differences to what we have
Absolutely,
here.
yeah.
You mentioned that I'm not going to get the name of the SAM Trans or whatever it was called. You said there was a measure they wanted to put light rail.
Yeah.
Your community didn't want to do it. And so they did a funding measure, and then you're not getting money from that measure, or how does that work?
That's correct. Yeah. That could be its own 5-hour presentation. Yeah, so the short version is the 3 county measures. So it was King, Pearson, Snohomish counties, which is basically our major metropolitan area in Washington. It was primarily sales tax, but also a property tax measure. And so what the 3 county board, the Sound Transit Board, was doing is trying to figure out what would they build and where would they build it. And because Sound Transit had a transit easement that they'd already purchased on this corridor, they did planning for different scenarios on the corridor. And so one was they already are currently building light rail from Seattle to Bellevue, and it was to extend that light rail line up through Bellevue, up through Kirkland, up to our urban center, our Potomac Urban Center, which is where we want that kind of transit. What happened, though, was, in my opinion, and my council's opinion, the engineers stopped listening. And when we kept saying we want transit, but we don't think light rail is the right transit, they couldn't hear anything but you don't want light rail, you don't want transit. And then our community was saying, we don't want buses or trains. We don't want anything. So it became really challenging really quickly. But as I said, in the end, our council stuck to, we do want transit, we just don't want this train. And for the reasons that I talked about, we just felt that the impact would be too severe for the ridership numbers, but we really felt like we gave them a viable alternative. We spent about $250,000 developing this bus rapid transit plan, which we handed to them and said, we actually think you could do this. And they just wouldn't. And so we're regretting that, but.
So in a future idea of putting transit on the line, how will you pay for it?
Mm-hmm. So the Sound Transit does measure about every 10 years. So we joke about, okay, so when ST4 comes, we'll talk about it. But we also have similar to you, we have a King County transit system that's just King County, which is our bus system. And they frequently go out more often than that with ballot measures. And we're now engaging them on the idea of maybe we just view this as a sub-regional busway and do a lot of the things that I talked to you guys about is, hey, let's pilot this idea of a Proterra electric bus or a driverless electric bus or something over on this side. So we're not giving up, but the transit people are not us. So we can't do a lot on our own. We could build a platform, we could build a road, but we can't actually provide any of the service under our laws. So we need some other partner to come along with us. So we're having those conversations right now.
And given that your community is sort of unclear whether they want transit, even though your leadership does that set up a challenge?
It's interesting. Like anything else, we did a lot of sort of demographic work with all of the hearings and stuff, like where are people and what are they saying? And it won't shock anyone that the most adamant opposition was all within about 100 feet of the corridor, right? Some beautiful high-end homes, a lot of people with significant means. As you get farther out, people want the transit. So what I think will happen, because it happened after we started having the listening sessions at the end, is the rest of the community that's not right on the corridor wants to be able to catch a bus on that corridor. The people who live right on the corridor don't want a bus. So I think a future council, whenever that may be, will have majority support, but they will definitely have very active, vocal, well-funded opposition, and they'll just have to make a choice.
Yeah.
And if it's this current council, they've already made that choice. What a future council will do, I don't know.
Well, there's probably lots more questions.
Yeah.
I want to respect everyone's time. I really appreciate the presentation. I think it was very, very helpful. Both these presentations were incredibly helpful for us as we think about the big issues here in Santa Cruz County. I do want to get a sign of how many people would like to make brief comments or questions now.